is actually a fascinating subject. It's also very relevant. You find it in a lot of articles these days. I think during the COVID pandemic, a lot of people had more free time, and many people took advantage of 23&Me or Ancestry.com, the different DNA tests that you can find family, you can find out who you are. Are you Ashkenazi, Sephardic? Do you come from Iceland, Greece, Middle East, Israel, America? I don't think most people come from America, but and so a lot of people took the time. It doesn't cost a lot, and you get a lot of information about your family. And sometimes you get more information than you thought you would get. So Allen, during COVID, and I don't know when he did his DNA test, discovered a lot more about himself and his family. And so we asked if he would share his story. And I think that something that might be of most interest to many of us will be after he shares the questions that we ask, because it might be something related to you in the sense of something you've discovered or studied or would like to know. So hopefully with questions as well, we'll get a lot more of the story. But without any further introductions, to dear friend, Allen Silberman, and we're so appreciative that your friend canceled. I'm going to put it up there. So here's one.
Well, thank you very much, and it is Bashert. I am never free on a Wednesday afternoon. I'm often never free. One of my goals when I retired was to be busy. I'm involved in lots of organizations, and I love being busy. And as long as I'm healthy, I'll continue being busy. First of all, I want to echo what Arlene said about the Rabbi and Hani. They are amazing. I support Smiling Seniors because of them. They are really the most amazing people. They are so selfless. They go out of their way for everybody. And I love them. I really do. I go out with them for lunch just to schmooze. They've been terrific for my mother-in-law, who's not doing well right now, but they just are amazing people. Okay, so let me tell you about my story. Now, as the rabbi said, he called me about, I don't know, was it 8 o'clock last night? So I have no formal presentation. I'm not on the speaker's tour. I love to talk to people. So I'm going to do my best. And most important, after I finish, ask questions. Any questions is fine. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know the answer. So I was out. This was around October of 2019. So it was before COVID, maybe November 2019. I play golf every Tuesday with a bunch of Jewish guys. And after golf, as the best part of it is we all go out to lunch together and we sit and we schmooze and we have a lot of fun. So this one time we're out to lunch, and one of the guys at the table said, you know, did any of you guys hear of 23&Me? And I said, I've never heard of 23&Me. He said, I signed up a couple of months ago, and I found out I had some cousins that I didn't even know about. So I connected with them, and I really, and we got together, and I'm just so happy I met cousins that I didn't know existed. So I was sitting there, and I said to myself, I have a very small family. I don't have a lot of relatives, at least that I was aware of. And that's a good idea. How do you go about doing it? And he told me it's simple. You go online, you sign up here and here. It wasn't that expensive. It was under $100, I believe. And they send you a kit. You spit into like a tube. You send it back to them. And they're going to come out with a list of all your relatives that are part of 23&Me. Now, obviously, somebody who's not in the system, you wouldn't know about, but anybody, and I forgot if they said they had millions of people in the system. I don't remember how many there were. So anyway, so I do that. I send out, I register, I get the kit. I do what I'm supposed to. I send it back. A couple of weeks later, I get a report from them. It's a report of 2,500 relatives that I have. Most of them admittedly are third or fourth or fifth cousins that are, it's like my great-grandparents' relatives. As they say, all Ashkenazi Jews are related somehow, and I am 99, and it did tell you, by the way, what percentage you are of everything, and I'm 99.7% Ashkenazi Jew. So anyway, that was fine, but the list comes in order of the people that are closest to you. I have to tell you, I did not know one person on that list. So that just means the people I did know, my real first cousins, just never signed up for 23&Me. But what was fascinating to me, and I believe there was an error, was the top 3 people on the list were people I didn't know, but were very, very closely related to me. One person's name was Tita, T-I-T-A, and she was 15% related to me. 15% means she's either my half-sister or my first cousin. I never heard of her. The next closest person was 7.5%, and his name was Sasha, S-A-S-C-H-A. No idea who it was. The third person was also 7.5%, and his name was Mark. Every other person was like 1%, 1.2%, etc. Now, the way 23&Me works is you can't just call up these people and say, who are you and how are you related to me? You have to send a message to 23&Me, and if that person wants to respond to you, they do. So I sent the message to Tita, who's the closest one, and I said, I don't know who you are, I don't know where you live, I don't know how old you are. All I know is that you're either my first cousin or my half-sister, and I don't know you. Do you know me? And it was a very polite, it wasn't as abrupt as I just described. It was a very polite note. And I waited for a response. And I said, I didn't know anything about him. This is the response I received. Hi, Alan. My name is Mark. Remember, Mark was the 7.5%, even though I sent it to Tita, who was the 15% person. I am Tita's son. Her English is not good enough to converse. She lives in Munich, Germany, and didn't feel comfortable in conversing with you because she doesn't speak English very well. She told me to send you a message that there is a 0 chance you are her first cousin, since every one of her aunts and uncles perished in the Shoah. And she used the word Shoah, not Holocaust, which, here in the United States, we use the word Holocaust. In Europe, they use the word Shoah. Only one uncle survived because he migrated to the United States before the war. However, he never had children. By the way, he did adopt a baby girl, but he never had children of his own. So there's no way you could be related to me. But I have now lost contact with that family. I do know that he died in the late 60s. It would be amazing if my mom, this is from Mark, it would be amazing if my mom was wrong, parentheses, both at finding a lost relative, but also as she is never wrong, LOL. Cheers, Mark. So I get this and I'm saying, who the hell is Mark? Who the hell is Tita? And I don't know, so I write back to him and I said, this is definitely very confusing. So you live in Munich, and where does Sasha and, no, I'm sorry. Tita lives in Munich. Where does Sasha? So he said, I live in Vancouver, and my brother Mark. So Mark and Sasha were brothers, and their mother is Tita. And those are the 3 that are on my list. Okay, top 3 on my list. And it turns out that he lives in Vancouver, and his brother Sasha lives in Munich, and his mother lives in Munich. So I decided to, and I said, can you give me Sasha's information? Because I understand that Tita doesn't speak English well. So I contacted Sasha. We had a lovely conversation. He spoke English well. He actually told me that, he told me the whole story of how his mother survived. the whole family perished in Poland, and she was hidden underground for literally 4 years. She got out, after liberation, she came out of her cave and went to a DP camp, met another survivor who ended up being, and married him, ended up being, and Tita is her daughter. Okay, that's who Tita is. I found out how old she was. She was, I think right now she's about 77 or 78, so she's around my age, and Sasha, and I asked Sasha to ask Tita a bunch of questions, and the answers were always, there's no way you could be related because there is no relationship. So, I mean, nobody survived. So I did inquire about this one uncle that they were talking about, and I said, just out of curiosity, what's his name? And they said, Yitzchak Karpfin. I said, that's very interesting. I have an uncle, not by birth. My mother's sister married a man whose name was Irving Karpf. Yitzchak Karpfin, Irving Karpf, sounds familiar. And he did have no children, but did adopt a baby girl. I knew this girl very well because she was my first cousin, right? And I knew Irving, who was my uncle, very well, and he married Rosie, who was my mother's sister. But he's not a blood relative of mine. He was his wife was the blood relative. So how am I related to these people? So I spoke to my cousin, who her name was Bella, and I said, do you have any information about your father? Her father died in 1969, and her mother died, I don't know when, sometime in the early 1980s. So they've been gone for over 40 years. I said, do you have any pictures, any information? So she dug up a whole bunch of stuff. Remember, this was the adopted daughter, and she found his gravestone. And guess what? On the gravestone, it said, Irving Karpf, originally Yitzchak Karpfin. So I went back to Sasha and to Mark, and I said, well, this person is, so we now know who your uncle was, but again, how are we related? So they couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure it out. So I hired a genealogist. And I said, I told him the whole story, and genealogist asked me a lot of questions, but basically said the first thing you have to do is first, do you have any siblings? I said, I did have a brother, but he died. Did he have any children? I said, yes. They said, make sure your nephew takes this test. And I said, why? I was there when my brother was born. He was 2.5 years younger than me. So I certainly know he came from the same parents as me. Why? She said, something fishy is going on. Have him take the test. She then continued and said, do you have cousins on both first cousins on both your mother and father's side that you know? I said, sure. He said, have them take the test. I couldn't, both my mom and mother's side, my father's side. So anyway, they all took the test. Turns out that my nephew, who should be 25% related to me, because remember, my brother should be 50%. If we come from the same parents, should be 50%. My nephew his son should be 25%. He was only 12.5%. So I was really confused. My cousin on my mother's side was on my list. My cousins on my father's side were not. These are my first cousins, and they're not related to me, and they're my first cousins on my father's side. So I've spent a lot of time talking to the genealogist and said, what does all this mean? And she said, it means your father was not your father. I said, what? He raised me from the day I was born. He lived with me till the day he died. He died at 59. What do you mean he's not my father? She said, all this indicates, all the information I gave her indicates that I had a different father. And now you got this Irving here. And I said, what does my uncle, because she was saying it appears that your uncle is your father. And I said, how is that possible? Etc. So she said, tell me the history of your parents. So I did. I hope I'm not spending too much, I'm not going into too much detail, but I want to let you know what's going on. Tell me the history of your parents. So basically, I said my parents were both born in Germany. They were there when Hitler was in power. They escaped. They escaped to Belgium and got married in 1938. My father had a sister who lived in the United States. She was able to sponsor him, and he came to the United States in 1938. It took him a year to get my mother over to the United States, going through all the diplomatic channels. And in 1939, my mother joined my father. Okay, my parents were now married from 1938. They were together from 1939. In 1943, my father enlisted in the U.S. Army because he wanted to become a U.S. citizen, and he enlisted in the U.S. Army, and he was honorably discharged in 1945. I was born December of 1946. Okay, so it made sense, right? He got discharged in 1945, and I was born in 1946. The genealogist, based in me telling that whole story to the genealogist, and I told her that my parents were Orthodox Jews, and this genealogist also is Jewish, and I'm not sure if she's Orthodox, but she certainly was aware of the Orthodox community. So she said, I know what happened. She said, your parents were together from 1939 to 1943, and they had no children. In those days, in the Orthodox community, they had children pretty quickly. Your father came back in 45. They tried for another whatever months. She still didn't get pregnant. Your mother went to, in those days, they didn't call it a fertility doctor. She went to I don't know, gynecologist. I don't know who, obstetrician. I don't know who you went to in those days. And the doctor said she will help your mother. I said, I didn't even know they had fertility things in the 1940s. She said they absolutely did. It was not common. It was not known commonly, but they absolutely did. And the fertility doctor, she didn't call it, they didn't call it a fertility doctor in those days. I don't know what they called it. And they said, this is what the genealogist is surmising, because she said she's seen lots of situations like this. And the doctor said, do you have any close friends or somebody that you really admire and like their morals and all that? And give me a list of those people. Give me a list. And they come up with a list. They ask these people to donate sperms and they put it in a petri dish. My father's sperm is in that petri dish too. And I ended up being born. So obviously my uncle, and now I'm gonna go back a moment. My Uncle Irving wasn't my uncle at that time. He married my mother's sister about 3 or 4 years later. Okay, because I was at the wedding, but so he wasn't my uncle. He was obviously a good friend of my mother's, who was also a religious person, and again, I don't know if there were 10 other people who donated sperm, or he was the only one. So So my story is that my Uncle Irving was my biological father, but my father was the person who raised me, and who's a very good father, and he raised me from the day I was born. The genealogist is convinced that my mother nor father knew any of this. All they knew is give me a list of people, they got the sperm. My mother never knew it, my father never knew it. The one regret I have is I wish my mother was alive today, because I was very, very close to my mother. And I would have confronted her in a positive way and say, tell me what happened. Did you go to a fertility doctor? Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you have an affair with Irving, who wasn't my uncle? I don't know. But she and I were very close, and she never hid anything from me. That's how I know her whole life story. I know the story of her family, the whole bit. So that my main regret is that she's not alive. A number of people have asked me when I tell them the story, how do you feel about it? That the person you thought your father, your whole life wasn't your father. I said, I'm not upset. He raised me. Who cares who my biological father was? The only thing you care about is from a medical point of view. But he raised me from the day I was born. So now my brother was born 2.5 years later. Obviously, at that time, it worked. I don't know, my father was his father, because he is related to my father's relatives. I am not. So that's really my story. I don't know, I wrote a bunch of notes. Oh, the last thing I wanted to say is, so I found all this out around January, February of 2020. So in speaking to Sasha, I said, I want to come to Munich to meet Tita. She's obviously my first cousin, and I'm sure she's a lovely person, et cetera. And they said, that would be great. And COVID hit, and we actually had planned on going that summer. COVID hit, we haven't gotten there yet, but I am in touch with them, and I did find a new family.
So before we take questions, I just want to add a little bit of interesting Jewish twist to all of this. Bonnie and I, many of you know, have gone through different secondary fertility. And one of the things that we learned was that many Jewish organizations that support infertility provide what's called supervision in the lab. They call it hashgacha, like a mashgiach that you find for kosher food. And the reason is because they want to make sure that there aren't mistakes in the lab. Embryo, sperm, eggs, like, are you getting the one that you gave? So one of the things that we, for me, always, any news article that comes up where I see a lawsuit or a story where somebody, thought this was their parent, it's somebody else, always piques my interest. And if you do follow current events, maybe, I don't know, Alan saw this, in Israel, there's a hospital system. So in Israel, fertility is actually either free or cheap. And so people who have connections to Israel, instead of going to treatments here, fertility treatments are either free or very, very cost effectively cheap. And therefore, people will go to Israel for treatments. They have amazing medical results with that. But there's a hospital system that's being sued right now in Israel for some sort of mistake that they didn't. I don't know if they called it a mistake or not. Did you see the story? It was like last month. So I always found, in general, these stories fascinating. I learned something throughout the story that today we know how infertility treatments work. They take egg, they take sperm, make an embryo in the lab, reinsert it, or there is another treatment which is intrauterine insemination, where they take the spouse's or someone else's sperm, the donor. But they don't do this in the lab, they actually just insert it back into the woman. It was fascinating for me to learn because in the 1940s and 50s, they were already doing things. Obviously, today they wouldn't do this. They wouldn't mix two sperms and say now it's a super mix. But for me, it was fascinating to know that this isn't a new issue that people are only now trying to come up with treatments. They were trying then to come up with as many solutions as they could for people and couples that were struggling with infertility. So I always find this story quite fascinating to me on personal notes, but also understanding because of that why they have this extra supervision. Because our conversations, we went to a doctor in New York who's religious. I think he was Syrian, Dr. Rossi, I don't remember. And it's like, why don't you trust the lab? Why do you need to have a third party entity making sure, specimen one and specimen one meets, and it might not be two, it should be doing it right. But as you hear from stories, you know that people want the best results. And even in today's day, people don't always take the straight path for them. With Allen, he just doesn't have the closure of knowing what really went on because he never got the opportunity to ask his mom. But I also find it quite fascinating that they took extreme measures. I would like to believe the way Allen believes, that it was a kosher type of an opportunity for them and not something that was happening in someone else's house, as they say. And therefore, it's like, to me, it's like the extremes that people go to have children is really what our society sees today, a more open conversation, something that was never talked about openly. This is always a story that is very personal to me as well. And now, if there are any people have questions, I'm going to walk around the mic so you can...
Before I take questions, one other thing I wanted to mention to you, for those people who are interested in this subject, I don't know if any of you have heard of Dani Shapiro, D-A-N-I, it's a female. She was an Orthodox person in New York. She wrote a book called Inheritance. She was a New York Times reporter. Her husband was an investigator, and she found out, I'm not going to go through the details, I don't want to give away the story, it's a great book. And she found out that her father, who she loved and loved, who was an Orthodox Jew, was not her father. And that's what the whole book is about. So if you're interested in the subject, you can find the book on Amazon. You can find it in the library. It's called Inheritance by Dani, D-A-N-I, Shapiro.
All right, we're going to take questions. We'll use the mic for this, but everyone can hear the question, and then they're for Allen, not for me.
Hi, Allen.
Hi, Hannah.
Fascinating story.
Put it closer.
It's a fascinating story, and I've heard other ones. I don't know about the other ones, but I just found out that there's an organization called Yes Tikva, which means there is hope. And Josh, myself, the principal of the high school, his wife is actually having a fundraiser for this organization. And so what Yes Tikva, like I said, is very hope. And she's taking a holiday. But what they do, it's a national organization, and they help young couples, Jewish couples, to get fertility home. So it has nothing to, well, indirectly, it has a lot to do with me, but it was amazing. Thank you.
We're going to keep the announcements on infomercials to questions for Allen. There are a lot of great organizations today that support couples and families trying to create a family. If you do want information, Connie would be a great resource to ask because she started an organization called Fruitful. That is there literally for couples and those navigating their fertility.
Thank you. Inspiration. How involved is the Mormon Church in all of these hereditary things? Because they are the genealogy, Uber genealogy groups. And is there an involvement? Do they own 23&Me and the other groups that they have the 23&Me Ancestry.com? Okay, those are the big. So, do you know anything about that?
I do know what you're discussing, but I did not contact them because I figured the genealogist did. She did a lot of research, and it took her a while to find it, but I know she contacted them, but as I said.
Her question was, if you know the Mormon Church is the owner of Ancestry.com or...
Oh, I can tell you there's Ancestry.com, there's MyHeritage, which I believe is an Israeli company, and there's 23&Me. I don't know who owns what.
You mean the website or the genealogist? So Susan's asking, what website did you go to?
I'm sorry?
What website did you go to? Ancestry.com?
No, I actually went to 23&Me, but after going to the genealogist, she recommended I go on to both MyHeritage and Ancestry.com and send it to her, send her the information, because that will help give her more information. But I started with 23&Me. They're all three different organizations that basically do the same thing. And unfortunately now, every single week, I get 30 new relatives. And I can tell you a story. Some of them I've contacted just because I was really interested. And one of them, it was not Jewish at all. And I said, how can it be my relative? And she said, I think my father impregnated a Jewish woman. This is what she said. So you get all kinds of stories.
I just had a question. I'm trying to understand. You said your mother didn't tell you, but she had this procedure done, right? Where they put all the sperm together.
She never talked about it.
But she didn't talk about it, but she must have known. She must have known there was a possibility that maybe you weren't.
I doubt, again, I'm just telling you what the genealogist said. I should have said, I am the oldest living person in my family, so I have nobody else I can speak to. What the genealogist said in those days, my mother went to a doctor. The doctor said, I will help you. Give me a list of some Jewish people, I assume Jewish people that you respect and all that, and just let me have her and let me have her husband's sperm and all that. But my mother doesn't know who it was. But my guess, that's why I said, I wish I could speak to her. And I said, did you go to a fertility doctor? Did you do this? This is all speculation because nobody's there to ask.
So she didn't share everything,
There was never a doubt in my mind or my father's mind or my mother's mind that these were my parents.
Just to add something on the new age, just to talk about infertility today is difficult, and this is where it's already talked about. So you can only imagine.
In the 40s, nobody.
Secret,
Yeah.
if you think about Jewish history.
And I don't think she told her sister, she had a couple of sisters. I don't think she told her sister.
Allen mentioned, just to add to that, in Jewish history, if a couple didn't have children or had children, they got divorced after 10 years. So it was the biggest secret. Like that would be, on that sense, you have to like kind of include all the things that his parents might have had in his mind. I don't share such a story. Any other questions?
some discussion in your family, and talking about all kinds of conditions that Jews may have because of that type of situation where we are discussing who we were intimate with or not, and they're talking about fertilization.
Sure, you're actually absolutely right. This is I can give another presentation on it, but if I'm allowed to spend 2 minutes, both my father, the person I thought was my father, my brother, and my father's brother all died of sudden heart disease before they were 60. They never suffered, they just dropped dead. When my 41-year-old brother died of a heart, who was in perfect shape, played in a full court basketball league, would ride his bike 50 miles a day, was thin, didn't take drugs or anything, dropped dead of a heart attack, I panicked. Same exact thing happened to my father, died instantly. He was driving on Labor Day in 1971, was driving with my mother and my aunt, and he just dropped dead in the car. Okay, my brother was the exact same thing. He played singles tennis, 41 years old, drove to his office and was found dead on the street. So what did I do? I was 43. I immediately panicked, went to a cardiologist. Oh, and by the way, my father was Orthodox, so they wouldn't do an autopsy. So we didn't know why he died because he was Orthodox. When my brother died, I insisted on an autopsy. The rabbi didn't want to do it, but I insisted. I got to know what's going on for me and for his son. He had a young son, and his son was 5 years old, and he had a daughter. I got to know what's going on. So they did an autopsy. and his main artery was 100% clogged. So I found this out. So I immediately went under cardiologist care, and I've been under cardiologist care ever since. But now, I am now 76 and a half years old. I've outlived every one of those men by 50, in some cases 30 years. So where I thought I had heart disease issues, I still may have heart disease. I still have high cholesterol, hypertension, those things, but I did think it was genetic. Now I see it probably isn't. I survived this far.
We're gonna take 2 more questions, and then if you have questions, privately.
My son did exactly what you did, the same thing, and he came back, like he said, 97 to 99% Eastern European. And he says, Dad, where did you come in? So I take it all with a grain of salt. Because another thing he come up with, he says in DNA, the Hasidic Jews in Europe in the 15th century had the same DNA as the Cherokee Indians in the South of the United States. So,
Again, until we see an update, we're you don't know that's true. Any other questions? All right, so we got one more, and then we'll close it up.
Have you had any contact with your cousins in Vancouver?
My cousin's
Contact with your cousins from Vancouver.
Oh yeah, that's the person. That's Mark who sent me. Yeah, so I have spoken to him. Yes, haven't gotten to Vancouver yet. I've been there plenty of times before I knew this, but I think because of COVID, everybody's travels. But yes, I have had contact with them. Well,